The sun hung low over Montrose, Colorado, painting the dusty streets in hues of amber and gold as Penelope Davis hurried toward the sound of commotion coming from the saloon. The year was 1875, and like every other day in this frontier town, trouble seemed to find its way to the main street with alarming regularity. But tonight was different. Tonight, the trouble would change her life forever. The crack of gunshots had scattered most folks to safety, but Penelope, with her medical bag clutched tightly in hand, moved against the current of frightened townspeople. At 24, she had already earned a reputation as the closest thing Montrose had to a proper doctor, despite the scoffs and disapproval her profession invited from certain quarters. "Miss Davis, don't go there," Sheriff Thompson called out as she passed him. "There's a stranger causing trouble." "Been shot up real bad but still fighting." "Then he needs me," she replied simply, not breaking her stride. The saloon doors swung open violently as a man stumbled out, his tall frame hunched in pain. Blood darkened the back of his shirt, spreading in an ominous stain across the rough fabric. Despite his injuries, he maintained a white-knuckled grip on his revolver, his eyes scanning the street with the alertness of a wounded predator. "Sir," Penelope called firmly, "you need medical attention." The stranger whirled toward her voice, his revolver half raised before recognition, not of her personally but of her medical bag and steady demeanor registered in his pain-glazed eyes. "Madam," he managed, his voice a rough whisper, "you best stay clear of me." But Penelope was already at his side, her small hand surprisingly strong as she guided him away from the saloon. "My clinic is just down the street. You can barely stand, let alone run, and whoever did this to you will be back to finish the job. Now come along." To the astonishment of onlookers, the bloodied stranger allowed himself to be led away by the slender woman barely reaching his shoulder. His boots dragged in the dirt as they made their slow progress to a modest building with a simple sign, P. Davis, Medical Services. Once inside, Penelope worked efficiently to clear her examination table. "Shirt off and lie on your stomach," she instructed, lighting additional lamps to better see her work. The stranger hesitated, his eyes a startling shade of blue against his dirt-streaked face finding hers. "You don't want to help me, miss. I'll be the judge of that," she replied, already preparing her instruments and bandages. Now, the shirt. With obvious difficulty, he shrugged out of his bloodied coat and began fumbling with his shirt buttons. Penelope stepped forward to assist, her clinical detachment unfaltering even as she revealed a torso marked not only with fresh wounds but a map of old scars that told a story of a violent life. "What's your name?" she asked, helping him onto the table, a pause. Roy Kincaid." "Well, Mr. Kincaid, you've got 2 bullet wounds, neither fatal if infection doesn't set in." She poured water into a basin and began the careful work of cleaning his injuries. Roy flinched as the cool water met his torn flesh. "You got steady hands, miss," Penelope, she corrected. "And steady hands are a requirement in my line of work." As she worked methodically to clean away the blood from his back, the warmth of the water providing some small comfort to his pain, Roy tensed suddenly. "You don't know what I've done," he said quietly, the words heavy with a burden she couldn't see but could somehow feel in the air between them. Penelope continued her gentle ministrations, her voice equally soft but firm when she replied, "I don't need to." Their eyes met in the reflection of a small mirror on her workbench, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the first fragile thread of connection in a world where both had learned to stand alone. "Everyone has a past, Mr. Kincaid," she added, reaching for her needle and suture thread. "In my clinic, I concern myself only with making sure you have a future." As the night deepened around the small clinic in Montrose, Penelope Davis worked by lamplight to mend the wounds of a stranger unaware that in saving Roy Kincaid's life, she was irrevocably altering the course of her own. The following morning, Roy awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the distant sounds of a town coming to life. For a moment, disorientation gripped him, then pain, sharp and insistent, brought the previous night's events rushing back. He was in a small room adjoining Penelope's clinic, lying on his side on a narrow bed. "Good, you're awake," came her voice from the doorway. She entered carrying a tray with a steaming cup and a bowl of something that smelled better than anything he could remember. "How long have I been out?" His voice sounded rough even to his own ears. "Just the night. Your body needed the rest." She set the tray on a small table beside the bed. "Can you sit up to eat, or do you need help?" pried Ward with practicality as Roy tested his strength, grimacing as he pushed himself upright. Penelope moved to assist without comment, adjusting pillows behind him with efficient, impersonal touches that nonetheless felt like the gentlest care he'd received in years. "You should have left me at the saloon," he said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "So you've mentioned." Her tone was matter of fact as she checked his bandages. "The fever broke in the night. You're lucky the bullets passed through cleanly." "Luck's not usually what follows me, madam." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then perhaps it's time for a change." She handed him the bowl of stew. "Eat." "You lost a good amount of blood." As she turned to leave, Roy caught her wrist gently. "Why are you helping me? You heard what I said. You don't know me." Penelope looked down at his hand on hers, then met his gaze directly. "I know enough. You were shot in the back, which rarely happens to a man in a fair fight, and when you stumbled out of that saloon, you made sure no innocent bystanders were in your line of fire, even though you were barely conscious." She gently extricated her wrist from his grasp. "Rest today. Sheriff Thompson will undoubtedly be by to ask questions, but I've told him you're my patient and not to be disturbed until you've recovered sufficiently." "You're protecting me." Disbelief colored his voice. "I'm protecting my patient," she corrected. "Now eat your stew before it gets cold." Later that day, as promised, Sheriff Thompson appeared at the clinic door. Penelope received him in her small office, away from the room where Roy rested. "Miss Davis," the sheriff began, removing his hat, "I need to speak with that man you're harboring." "My patient is recovering from serious injuries and is not yet well enough for interrogation," she replied calmly, arranging bottles of medicine on a shelf. The sheriff sighed heavily. "Do you have any idea who you've taken in?" "That's Roy Kincaid. He rode with the Delaney gang out of Texas before striking out on his own. There are wanted posters with his name from here to the Mississippi." Penelope's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "Is he wanted in Colorado territory?" "Not specifically, but then as I understand the law, Sheriff, you have no immediate cause to arrest him, and as his doctor, I cannot in good conscience release him to your custody until he's stable." Thompson's face reddened. "This isn't like taking in one of your usual strays, Penelope. This man is dangerous." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, finally turning to face him fully. "But he's also injured and in need of medical care, which is my calling. I give you my word that, when he's recovered enough to be questioned, I'll send for you myself." The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then jammed his hat back onto his head. "You've got 3 days, Miss Davis, then I'm coming back with or without your permission." After the sheriff departed, Penelope stood motionless in her office, processing this new information. She'd known Roy Kincaid wasn't an ordinary drifter. The quality of his weapons and the way he carried himself spoke of a man accustomed to violence, but a notorious outlaw was another matter entirely. When she entered his room, Roy was sitting up, his expression making it clear he'd overheard the conversation. "You should have let him take me," he said quietly. Penelope moved to check his bandages, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "You'd likely die of infection in that jail cell. I didn't spend all night saving your life to have Sheriff Thompson undo my work. You heard what he said about me." "I did." And she met his gaze steadily. "And I meant what I said last night. Everyone has a past, Mr. Kincaid. Some pasts don't deserve forgiveness." "I'm not offering forgiveness. That's between you and whoever you've wronged." She finished adjusting his bandage. "I'm offering medical care and perhaps a chance to decide what kind of future you want if you survive this." Roy studied her face, searching for judgment or fear and finding neither. "You're a peculiar woman, Miss Davis, so I've been told." The hint of a smile softened her features. "Rest now. You've got 3 days before the sheriff returns and you'll need your strength." As Penelope turned to leave, Roy's voice stopped her. I left the gang a year ago. Been trying to outrun them ever since. She paused in the doorway. Is that who shot you, your former associates? Illy Delaney doesn't take kindly to deserters, especially ones who know as much as I do. He shifted uncomfortably. They'll keep coming. I should leave Montrose as soon as I can ride. Penelope considered this. Perhaps, but not before you're healed enough to have a fighting chance. She glanced back at him. Get some sleep, Mr. Kincaid. Tomorrow we'll see about getting you on your feet. The following morning, Roy awoke to find clean clothes folded at the foot of his bed, simple garments, well worn but mended with care. They belonged to my father, Penelope explained when she came to check on him. They might be a bit short in the arms and legs, but they're better than your blood-stained things. Your father won't mind, Roy asked, fingering the soft flannel shirt. A shadow passed across her face. He passed away 2 years ago, influenza. I'm sorry. Thank you. She helped him sit up, her clinical touch assessing his wounds. The inflammation is reduced. If you feel up to it, we might try walking a little today. The process of standing proved more challenging than Roy had anticipated. His legs, weakened by blood loss and immobility, trembled beneath him, forcing him to lean heavily on Penelope's slender frame. Easy, she murmured, her arm surprisingly strong around his waist. Small steps. They made a slow circuit of the room, Roy gritting his teeth against the pain that flared with each movement. By the time they reached the bed again, sweat beaded on his forehead and his breathing came in harsh pants. That's enough for now, Penelope decided, helping him back onto the bed. It's pathetic, Roy muttered, frustration evident in his voice. I can't even walk across a damn room. You were shot twice and lost enough blood to paint my clinic floor, she reminded him pragmatically. Recovery takes time I don't have. If Delaney's men tracked me to Montrose, then rushing your recovery will only ensure you're too weak to face them when they return. Penelope's tone brooked no argument. Now I need to see to my other patients. There's water and bread beside your bed if you get hungry. As the day progressed, Roy pushed himself to regain his strength, forcing his body to cooperate through sheer force of will. By evening, he could make his way slowly to the small window overlooking Montrose's main street, where he stood watching the comings and goings of the townspeople with the habitual wariness of a man accustomed to looking over his shoulder. Penelope found him there when she returned, silhouetted against the fading light. You shouldn't be up so much, she chided, though there was a note of approval in her voice. Needed to know the lay of the land. He didn't turn from the window. Your town seems peaceful enough. It is most days. She moved to stand beside him, following his gaze to the street below. People here work hard and mind their own business. It's a good place. Roy glanced at her profile, struck by the quiet dignity in her features. How'd you end up doctoring in a place like this? A soft smile touched her lips. My father was the town's physician. I assisted him from the time I was old enough to hold instruments. When he became ill, I took over more of his duties. After he passed, the town had no doctor, and I had the knowledge, if not the formal training. And they accepted a woman doctor, just like that. Hardly. She gave a short laugh. But when the nearest qualified physician is in Denver, people become pragmatic about their prejudices, especially when there's a mining accident or a difficult birth. Roy nodded, understanding. The frontier had its own rules, its own necessities that often trumped conventional thinking. And you, Penelope asked, how does a man end up riding with the likes of Illy Delaney? Roy stiffened, his gaze returning to the street. Bad choices, one after another. She waited, saying nothing, the silence between them an invitation rather than a demand. I was 17 when the war ended, he finally continued. Came home to Texas to find my family's ranch burned out, parents dead from fever, started drifting, taking whatever work I could find. Illy's gang was robbing a train I was working security on. I managed to wing him before they overwhelmed us. And he recruited you instead of killing you, Penelope surmised. Said he admired my aim and my guts, offered me more money than I'd seen in my life. Roy's mouth twisted bitterly. When you're 20 and hungry and angry at the world, that kind of offer is hard to refuse. What changed? Why leave after all that time? Roy was silent for so long that Penelope thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost inaudible. We hit a stagecoach outside of San Antonio. It wasn't supposed to have passengers, just a payroll shipment, but there was a woman and her daughter. He swallowed hard. He doesn't leave witnesses, never has, understanding dawned in Penelope's eyes. You couldn't do it. I turned my gun on Ollie instead, gave the woman and child a chance to run while we fought. His hands gripped the windowsill tightly. I wounded him badly enough that the gang had to retreat, but not before Ollie swore he'd hunt me to the ends of the earth, and he has been ever since. Roy nodded grimly. A year of looking over my shoulder, thought I'd lost them in the mountains, but he gestured to his bandaged back. Guess I was wrong. Penelope studied him thoughtfully. So you saved that woman and child, knowing it would make you a hunted man for the rest of your life. Don't make me out to be some kind of hero, Roy said sharply. One decent act doesn't erase 8 years of the things I did with that gang. No, she agreed quietly. It doesn't, but it does suggest you're not the man you were when you joined them. Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and Roy found himself unable to look away from the clear, steady gaze that seemed to see past his defenses. You should rest, Penelope said finally, breaking the moment. Tomorrow will be another day of building your strength back. As she turned to leave, Roy caught her hand. Thank you, he said simply, not just for patching me up, but for, he struggled to find the words. I know, she replied softly, squeezing his hand once before gently withdrawing hers. Good night, Mr. Kincaid, Roy, he corrected. Seems like we're past formalities. Her smile in the fading light was brief but genuine. Good night, Roy. Over the next 2 days, Roy's recovery progressed with remarkable speed, driven by the looming deadline of the sheriff's promised return and Roy's own restless nature. Penelope worked him through increasingly lengthy walks, first around the clinic, then in the small garden behind it, sheltered from curious eyes by a high fence. During these sessions, they talked hesitantly at first, then with growing ease. Penelope told him of her childhood in Montrose, of her mother who had died when she was young, of her father's patient teaching and his belief that his daughter's mind was too valuable to waste on merely domestic pursuits. Roy spoke of his own youth in Texas, his time as a ranch hand before the war, careful to avoid the darker chapters of his life, yet unable to hide the shadows that occasionally crossed his face when certain memories surfaced. On the afternoon before Sheriff Thompson's deadline, they sat in the garden, Roy resting on a simple wooden bench while Penelope tended to her medicinal herbs. I'll be leaving tomorrow, Roy announced, watching her hands move deftly among the plants. Penelope's movements paused briefly before resuming. Your wounds aren't fully healed. They're healed enough. He flexed his shoulder experimentally, wincing only slightly. I can ride, and that's what matters. The sheriff is the least of my concerns. Delaney's men could return any day, and I won't bring that kind of trouble to your door again. Penelope straightened, wiping soil from her hands onto her apron. Where will you go? Roy shrugged. North, maybe Montana Territory, somewhere I can lose myself. Alone, she said, the word both a statement and a question. It's safer that way. Penelope studied him, her gaze disconcertingly direct. Is that what you want, to spend the rest of your life running and hiding? What I want stopped mattering a long time ago, Roy replied, an edge to his voice. It's about surviving now. Is it? She moved to sit beside him on the bench, maintaining a proper distance, yet somehow feeling closer than anyone had been to him in years. Or is it about punishing yourself for the things you've done? Roy stared at her, caught between indignation and the unsettling sensation of being truly seen. You don't know what you've done. Yes, you've mentioned that, she interrupted, a rare hint of impatience in her tone. And I've told you I don't need to know the details to understand that you're a man trying to be better than his past. But running forever isn't redemption, Roy, it's just more punishment. What would you have me do? He demanded. Turn myself in, hang for my crimes. I'd have you find a way to live that matters. Her voice softened. To make amends not by dying or by hiding, but by doing good in this world. The sincerity in her eyes unsettled him more than any threat of violence ever had. Roy looked away, focusing on the distant mountains visible over the garden fence. You make it sound simple. It's anything but simple, Penelope acknowledged, yet people rebuild their lives every day. This country is full of men and women who have reinvented themselves after war, loss, or failure. Roy was silent for a long moment, considering her words. And where would someone like me begin such a reinvention? A smile touched Penelope's lips. Perhaps right here in Montrose. We have need of men who can handle themselves in difficult situations. The silver mines up in the hills hire security. The stage line loses drivers regularly to better prospects. You're suggesting I stay? Disbelief colored his voice. I'm suggesting you consider it. At least until you're fully healed and have a proper plan. She rose from the bench. But the choice is yours, of course. Your horse and gear are in the livery stable. I've paid your bill through the week. As she turned to go, Roy caught her hand, the gesture becoming familiar between them. Why are you doing all this for me? Penelope looked down at their joined hands, then met his eyes steadily. Because I believe people deserve second chances, because I've seen enough of you to know you're worth the risk. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then the distant sound of the town clock striking the hour broke the spell, and Penelope gently withdrew her hand. Rest now. Whatever you decide, you'll need your strength. That evening, as dusk settled over Montrose, Roy stood at the window of his room, watching as lamps were lit along the main street and the day's activities wound down. His saddlebags lay packed on the bed, his gun belt cleaned and oiled beside them. Everything ready for an early departure. Yet something held him there, staring out at this quiet town that had offered him an unexpected sanctuary. Or perhaps it wasn't the town at all, but the woman who had pulled him back from the brink with her steady hands and unshakable belief. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Penelope entered, carrying his laundered and mended shirt and coat. I thought you might want these for your journey, she said, placing them on the bed beside his saddlebags. Her eyes took in his preparations with a carefully neutral expression. Thank you. Roy turned fully from the window. For everything, Penelope nodded, her hands clasping together in front of her apron. I've written a letter for you to carry. It explains your medical condition and treatment should you need assistance on the road. Always thinking ahead, he observed with a faint smile. It's my nature. They stood in awkward silence, the air between them charged with words unsaid and possibilities unrealized. Will you at least stay until morning? Penelope finally asked. The mountain trails are treacherous in the dark, even for someone familiar with them. Roy hesitated, then nodded. Until morning. Relief flickered briefly across her features. Good, I've made a stew for supper if you'd care to join me in the kitchen. It's more comfortable than eating alone in here. The domestic simplicity of the invitation struck Roy with unexpected force. How long had it been since he'd shared a meal at a proper table, with someone who actually wanted his company? I'd like that, he said, surprised by the sincerity in his own voice. Penelope's kitchen was small but warm, filled with the savory aroma of the stew simmering on the stove. A table set for two stood in the corner near a window overlooking the garden, now silvered by moonlight. They ate mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable one, broken occasionally by practical conversation about the weather, the condition of the mountain passes, the best routes north. If there was a wistfulness in Penelope's eyes or a reluctance in Roy's movements, neither acknowledged it directly. As Roy helped clear the dishes, ignoring Penelope's protests that he should rest his healing wounds, Sheriff Thompson's heavy knock rattled the clinic's front door. He's early, Penelope muttered, drying her hands hastily on her apron. Roy's hand instinctively moved to his side, but his gun belt was still in the bedroom. I'll get my things. Wait, Penelope caught his arm. Let me speak with him first. Before Roy could object, she was moving through the clinic to the front door. From the kitchen, he could hear the low murmur of voices, the sheriff's gruff tones, Penelope's measured responses. Then footsteps approached the kitchen, and Penelope reappeared, her expression tight. There's news, she said simply. You should hear it. Sheriff Thompson entered behind her, his weathered face grim as his eyes fell on Roy. Kincaid, Sheriff, Roy straightened, prepared for the worst. Two men matching the description of your former associates were found dead 10 miles south of town this morning, Thompson said without preamble. Ambush, from the looks of it. Professional job, Roy frowned. Delaney's men, based on the wanted posters I checked, yes. Amos Reeves and the Diaz brothers. That's 3 men. One got away, apparently, left a blood trail heading east, but it disappeared at the river. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You know anything about this? I've been here since Miss Davis brought me in, Roy replied truthfully. But if Reeves and the Diaz brothers are dead, someone's hunting Delaney's gang. And that doesn't surprise you, Roy shook his head slowly. Illy's made plenty of enemies over the years. Rivals, former partners, families of his victims. Could be any of them caught up with these 3. Thompson studied him skeptically. Quite a coincidence, them showing up near Montrose just after you arrive. They weren't coming for me, Roy said, realization dawning. They were running from someone else. Must have recognized me when I crossed their path at the saloon and took the opportunity to settle an old score. The sheriff grunted noncommittally. Whatever the case, I came to warn you both. If there's some kind of gang war spilling into my jurisdiction, I want no part of it. And neither should you, Miss Davis. Penelope had been silent during this exchange, her face pale but composed. Thank you for the warning, Sheriff. I appreciate your concern. Thompson looked between them, his expression softening slightly when it rested on Penelope. I meant what I said before. This man brings danger with him. If you have any sense, you'll send him on his way as soon as he can ride. After the sheriff departed, a heavy silence filled the kitchen. Roy leaned against the counter, his mind racing with the implications of Thompson's news. Someone's hunting Delaney's gang, he said finally, and doing a thorough job of it. Penelope wrapped her arms around herself as though suddenly cold. Does that change your plans? Roy considered the question carefully. It means Delaney might be too busy saving his own skin to worry about me for a while. He ran a hand through his hair. But whoever is hunting the gang might come looking for me too once they learn I was part of it. So you'll still leave. Her voice was carefully neutral. It would be safer for everyone if I did. Penelope turned to face him fully, her eyes bright with an emotion he couldn't quite name. And what about what's safer for you, Roy? Running alone with half-healed wounds, no allies, no one to watch your back. I've survived worse odds. Perhaps. But is survival all you want from life now? She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint freckles across the bridge of her nose, the flecks of amber in her green eyes. What about living? What about finding some measure of peace? Roy swallowed hard, uncomfortably aware of her proximity and the effect it had on his resolve. Peace isn't in the cards for men like me, Penelope. I don't believe that. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I've seen how you look at this town, at the ordinary people going about their lives. You want what they have, a place to belong, work that doesn't involve looking over your shoulder, maybe even people who care whether you live or die. Her words struck too close to truths he'd barely admitted to himself. Roy turned away, unable to bear the intensity of her gaze. Wanting something doesn't make it possible. No, she agreed softly, but refusing to try ensures it never will be. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway and the distant sounds of the town settling in for the night. Stay, Penelope said finally. At least until we know more about who's hunting Delaney's gang. The sheriff may not like it, but he respects my judgment enough to give you a chance if I vouch for you. Roy closed his eyes, feeling the pull of her offer like a physical force. To stay, to rest, to perhaps find a way forward that didn't involve constant flight or the inevitable violent end he'd long accepted as his fate. 1 week, he found himself saying. I'll stay 1 week until we know more about what's happening with Delaney, then I'll make a decision. The smile that illuminated Penelope's face made something long dormant stir in his chest. 1 week, she agreed. That's all I ask. That week stretched into 2, then a month, as Roy's wounds healed and no further news of Delaney or his hunters reached Montrose. Cautiously, Roy began to establish a place for himself in the town. He took odd jobs, first helping at the livery stable where his strength was useful despite his healing injuries, then working security for one of the town's merchants who had been having trouble with thieves. To his surprise, the people of Montrose accepted him with little question. Penelope's vouching for him carried significant weight, and his own quiet competence and willingness to work hard did the rest. If some regarded him warily at first, their suspicion gradually gave way to grudging respect. Throughout it all, Penelope remained his strongest advocate and most steadfast friend. Their initial connection deepened as they shared meals, conversations, and increasingly, the small daily routines that form the backbone of any relationship. Roy found himself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit in her garden, discussing the day's events, or sometimes simply enjoying a companionable silence. On one such evening, as summer gave way to the first hints of autumn, Roy finally asked the question that had been on his mind since that first night in her clinic. "Why didn't you ever marry? A woman like you must have had offers." Penelope looked up from the medical journal she'd been reading, surprise evident in her expression. "That's rather personal, isn't it?" "I suppose it is." Roy leaned back in his chair, embarrassed by his own boldness. "Forget I asked. No, it's all right." She set the journal aside, considering her words carefully. There were offers, yes. The son of a Denver banker who summered here, a widowed rancher with 3 children, even Sheriff Thompson years ago, and none of them suited. A small smile played at her lips. It wasn't a question of suiting. "My father's illness came at a time when I might have considered marriage. Instead, I took over his practice. After he passed, the work became my life." She shrugged lightly. "The men who were interested wanted a wife, not a doctor, and I couldn't give up medicine for marriage." Roy nodded, understanding. "Your father raised you to be independent." "He did. Though I doubt he intended for me to remain unmarried. He often spoke of finding someone who would value my mind as much as any other quality." Her gaze drifted to the darkening garden. "But such men are rare, especially in places like Montrose." The wistfulness in her voice stirred something protective in Roy. "Their loss," he said quietly. Penelope's eyes returned to his face, studying him with an intensity that made him both uncomfortable and exhilarated. "And you?" "No wife waiting somewhere for your return," Roy shook his head. "The life I led didn't lend itself to permanent attachments. No sweetheart at all," he hesitated, memories surfacing of a young woman in San Antonio years ago. "There was someone once, before the gang. But when I went down that road, I had to leave everything else behind." His mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "Probably for the best. She deserved better than what I became." Penelope was silent for a moment, absorbing this glimpse into his past. "And now, what do you want now, Roy?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with possibilities neither had yet dared to voice aloud. Roy found himself unable to look away from her face, illuminated softly by the lantern on the table between them. "Now," he said slowly, "I want things I never thought possible: peace, purpose." He paused, gathering courage, a chance to be worthy of someone's trust. "You already have that," Penelope said softly. "My trust. And that means more to me than I can say." Their eyes held in the lantern light, the moment stretching, charged with unspoken feelings. Then from the street came the sound of urgent hoofbeats and shouting, shattering the fragile moment. Roy was on his feet instantly, his body tensed for danger. "Stay here," he told Penelope, already moving toward the front of the clinic. On the porch, he found Sheriff Thompson dismounting hurriedly from a lathered horse. "Kincaid," the lawman acknowledged grimly. "Where's Miss Davis?" "I'm here," Penelope said, appearing behind Roy. "What's happened?" "Mining accident up at the Silverton claim. At least 3 men trapped, others injured. They're bringing them down now, but they need a doctor on site for the worst cases." Penelope was already turning back inside. "I'll get my bag." "It's a rough trail, Miss Davis," Thompson warned, "and there may be further danger from unstable tunnels." "Nevertheless, if men are injured, I'm going." Her tone brooked no argument as she disappeared into the clinic. Roy exchanged looks with the sheriff. "I'll go with her," he said, the decision made without conscious thought. Thompson studied him for a moment, then nodded curtly. "See that no harm comes to her, Kincaid." The town needs its doctor." Within minutes, Penelope had gathered her medical supplies and Roy had saddled their horses from the livery stable. The ride to the Silverton mine was arduous, the trail steep and treacherous in the gathering darkness. Roy stayed close to Penelope, watchful for any sign of fatigue or danger. The scene at the mine was chaotic, men shouting, the injured groaning, lanterns casting harsh shadows across frightened faces. Penelope dismounted and immediately took charge, her voice calm and authoritative as she directed the placement of the wounded and began assessing injuries. Roy found himself pressed into service as her assistant, holding lanterns, fetching water, helping to immobilize broken limbs, and occasionally simply providing a strong hand for the injured to grip during painful procedures. Through it all, he watched Penelope with growing admiration. Gone was any trace of the quiet, sometimes reserved woman from the garden conversations. In her place stood a confident professional, unfazed by the blood and pain surrounding her, focused entirely on saving lives. It was nearly dawn when the last of the trapped miners was brought out alive, thanks to the efforts of his comrades, but badly injured. As Penelope worked to stabilize him for transport to town, Roy noticed her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. "You need to rest," he said quietly, bringing her a cup of coffee from the miner's cookfire. She shook her head stubbornly. "Not until they're all stable enough to move. You can't help them if you collapse yourself." Her eyes met his, fatigue evident in their depths despite her determined expression. "I won't collapse, but I might accept that coffee." As she took the cup from him, their fingers brushed, and Roy felt a surge of something powerful and protective. This woman, who had saved his life and then offered him a chance at redemption, who worked tirelessly for others with little thought for herself, she awakened feelings in him he'd thought long dead. By mid-morning, the injured miners had been transported to Montrose, with the most serious cases installed in Penelope's clinic, and the others taken to their homes with instructions for care. Penelope herself moved from patient to patient, checking bandages, administering pain medication, offering reassurance to worried families. Roy remained at her side throughout, fetching supplies, helping move patients, and occasionally insisting she take a moment to drink water or have a bite of food. By late afternoon, when the crisis had stabilized and the patients were resting as comfortably as their injuries allowed, Penelope finally succumbed to exhaustion. Roy found her in her office, slumped over her desk, fast asleep. Without hesitation, he gathered her into his arms and carried her to her private quarters at the rear of the clinic. She stirred briefly as he laid her on her bed but didn't fully wake, testament to how truly exhausted she was. He removed her boots and covered her with a quilt, then took up a position in a chair near the door, determined to ensure both her rest and the welfare of her patients until she awoke. As dusk fell, Roy made rounds of the clinic, checking on each patient as he had seen Penelope do, offering water or additional blankets as needed. In the main ward, he found Mrs. Thornton, the elderly mother of one of the injured miners, keeping vigil by her son's bedside. "You're good to help her like this," the woman said softly, her eyes shrewd as they assessed Roy. Most men wouldn't have the stomach for it. Roy shrugged uncomfortably. "Miss Davis needed the assistance?" Mrs. Thornton's knowing look made it clear she suspected more complex motivations. "She's a special one, our Penelope. This town doesn't deserve her, but we're blessed to have her all the same." "Yes," Roy agreed simply. "You are, and she seems happier these past weeks." The older woman's gaze remained fixed on him. "More alive, somehow." "I suspect that has something to do with you, Mr. Kincaid." Before Roy could formulate a response, a soft voice from the doorway interrupted. "Mrs. Thornton, you should be resting too. Your son is stable now." Penelope stood there, her hair hastily pinned up, her clothing rumpled from sleep but her eyes clear and alert. "I was just telling Mr. Kincaid here what a fine job he's done looking after things while you rested," Mrs. Thornton said, her tone innocent but her eyes twinkling. Penelope's gaze shifted to Roy, a mixture of gratitude and something warmer in her expression. "Yes, he's been invaluable." The days following the mining accident marked a subtle shift in Roy and Penelope's relationship. The shared experience of working side by side through the crisis had forged a deeper connection between them, one that manifested in small but significant ways: a lingering touch when passing medical instruments, exchanged glances that communicated without words, a growing ease in each other's presence that spoke of deepening trust. As autumn painted the surrounding mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Roy found himself thinking less and less about moving on. The weeks had stretched into months, and no word of Delaney or his pursuers had reached Montrose. Roy had secured regular work with the stage line, riding shotgun on the routes through the mountain passes, while continuing to assist Penelope at the clinic when needed. It was a life he had never imagined possible: honest work, respect from the community, and most precious of all, the growing certainty that Penelope Davis saw in him not the outlaw he had been, but the man he was striving to become. On a crisp October evening, as they walked back from a harvest celebration in the town square, Roy finally gave voice to the question that had been building in him for weeks. "Penelope," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "I've been thinking about the future." She glanced up at him, her cheeks flushed from the cool air and perhaps something more. "Oh, yes, about staying in Montrose permanently." He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "If I were to do that, would you?" The words failed him, inadequate to express the depth of what he was trying to ask. But Penelope's eyes softened with understanding, and she took a step closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath when she spoke. "Yes, Roy. If you're asking what I think you're asking, then yes." Relief and joy surged through him, so intense it was almost painful. Without thinking, he reached for her, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that belied their strength. "I'm not the man you deserve," he whispered. "But I swear I'll spend every day trying to be." "You're exactly the man I choose," Penelope replied, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "The past is past. It's the present and future that matter now." When he kissed her, it was with reverence and wonder, as though she were something precious and fragile. But Penelope responded with unexpected passion, her arms winding around his neck, her body pressing closer, reminding him that beneath her proper exterior beat a heart as fierce and determined as his own. They broke apart at the sound of approaching footsteps, both flushed and breathing harder than the cool evening warranted. Sheriff Thompson rounded the corner, his eyebrows rising at the sight of them standing so close together on the darkened street. "Evening, Miss Davis, Kincaid," he said, touching his hat brim. If he noticed their disheveled appearance, he gave no sign beyond a barely perceptible tightening of his mouth. "Fine night." "Yes, it is, Sheriff," Penelope replied with remarkable composure. "We were just returning from the harvest celebration." "I'll walk you the rest of the way home," Thompson offered, his pointed look at Roy making it clear this wasn't merely a courtesy. Before Roy could object, Penelope laid a calming hand on his arm. "Thank you, Sheriff, but that won't be necessary. Mr. Kincaid is seeing me safely home." Thompson's gaze shifted between them, assessing. Finally, he nodded curtly. "As you wish, Miss Davis. Good night to you both." As he continued on his rounds, Penelope stifled a laugh at Roy's expression. "He means well," she said, slipping her hand into the crook of Roy's arm to resume their walk. "He's been looking out for me since my father died." "He doesn't approve of me," Roy observed. "He's concerned. It's his nature to be suspicious." She squeezed his arm reassuringly. "But he'll come around once he sees that you're truly committed to staying." The mention of commitment brought them back to the conversation interrupted by the sheriff. As they reached the clinic, Roy turned to Penelope once more, taking her hands in his. "I want to do this properly," he said. "You deserve that much. I'll speak to Reverend Collins tomorrow about publishing the banns, if you're certain this is what you want." Penelope's smile was radiant in the moonlight. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Roy Kincaid." The news of their engagement spread through Montrose with the speed that only small-town gossip can achieve. Reactions were mixed, some genuinely pleased for their well-respected doctor, others skeptical of the former outlaw's reformation, and a few openly disapproving of the match. Sheriff Thompson made his opinion clear when Roy approached him the day after proposing to Penelope. "You're asking for my blessing," he said incredulously. "After less than 6 months of honest living, I'm asking for your understanding," Roy replied steadily. "I love her. I want to build a life with her, and I'll never go back to what I was before." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. "If you ever hurt her, if you bring danger to her door or return to your old ways, there won't be a place on this earth where you can hide from me. Are we clear?" "Perfectly." Thompson sighed heavily. "She's always had a mind of her own. If this is what she wants, I won't stand in her way, but I'll be watching, Kincaid. Don't forget that." Despite such reservations from some quarters, preparations for the wedding moved forward. December was set as the date, allowing time for Penelope's few distant relatives to travel to Montrose and for Roy to establish himself more firmly in the community. Life settled into a new rhythm, with Roy continuing his work for the stage line while helping Penelope at the clinic when needed. The couple found joy in simple domesticity, shared meals, evening walks, plans for their future together. For Roy, who had spent so many years living in the shadows, the ordinary pleasures of a respectable life were nothing short of miraculous, but the past was not done with him yet. On a cold November morning, as Roy prepared to depart with the eastbound stage, a stranger rode into Montrose, a lean, hard-faced man whose watchful eyes and well-worn gun belt marked him as dangerous even before he approached the stage office where Roy was loading luggage. Roy Kincaid. The stranger inquired, his voice carrying the soft drawl of Texas. Roy's hand instinctively moved closer to his own weapon. "Who's asking?" "Name's Marshall, Pinkerton Detective Agency." The man produced a badge from his coat pocket. "I've been tracking what's left of the Delaney gang for the better part of a year." A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air ran through Roy. "What's that got to do with me?" Marshall's thin smile held no warmth. "You rode with them for 8 years, Kincaid. You know how Howley Delaney thinks, where he might go to ground. I need that information. I've been out of the gang for over a year. Whatever I knew then is useless now. I'll be the judge of that." Marshall glanced around the busy street, then lowered his voice. "I've been authorized to offer you immunity for any past crimes in exchange for your cooperation. Help me bring Delaney in, and your slate gets wiped clean." Roy stared at the detective, mind racing. Official immunity would mean an end to looking over his shoulder, a chance to start his life with Penelope without the shadow of his past hanging over them. But helping hunt down Delaney would mean leaving Montrose, possibly for months, and putting himself directly in the line of fire once again. "I need to think about it," he said finally. Marshall nodded. "I'm staying at the hotel, but don't take too long. From what I hear, Delaney's getting desperate, and desperate men do desperate things." The warning hung in the air as the detective walked away, leaving Roy with a decision that could determine not just his own future, but Penelope's as well. That evening, Roy shared everything with Penelope, watching her face carefully as he explained Marshall's offer and the implications for their future. "If I help him bring in Delaney, I could be free of my past once and for all," he concluded. "No more wanted posters, no more looking over my shoulder, but it would mean leaving you, possibly for months, and putting myself in danger again." Penelope was silent for a long moment, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "And if you don't help him?" "Then I continue living as I have been, hoping my past doesn't catch up with me, that Delaney either forgets about me or meets his end without my involvement." Roy ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "But there would always be the risk, Penelope. Always the chance that someday someone would recognize me or come looking for me, and that could put you in danger too." "So either way, there's risk," she said thoughtfully. "The question is which risk we can best live with." Roy was struck by her use of we rather than you, a simple word that encompassed everything he loved about this remarkable woman. She saw his problems as theirs to solve together, his burdens as shared rather than his alone to bear. "What do you think I should do?" he asked, genuinely seeking her counsel. Penelope met his gaze directly. "I think you should do what will let you sleep at night, Roy. If that means helping bring Delaney to justice so that others don't suffer at his hands, then that's what you should do. If it means staying here and building our life together, trusting that the past will remain in the past, then I support that too. She reached across the table to take his hand. But whatever you decide, know that I'll be here waiting when it's done. Her unwavering support humbled him. I don't deserve you, he said softly. Love isn't about deserving, she replied. It's about choosing, and I choose you, Roy Kincaid, past and all. After a night of soul-searching, Roy made his decision. He would help Marshall track down Delaney, not for the promised immunity, though that was certainly a powerful incentive, but because it was the right thing to do. Delaney had left a trail of victims across multiple states, and if Roy's knowledge could help bring him to justice, he had a responsibility to use it. Penelope accepted his decision with the quiet strength he had come to rely on, helping him prepare for what might be a lengthy absence. We'll postpone the wedding until you return, she said practically as they discussed arrangements. Spring would be a lovely time for a ceremony. I'll be back before then, Roy promised, gathering her into his arms. I won't let anything keep me from you for long. Their parting, when it came 2 days later, was private and poignant. Standing in the early morning light outside the clinic, Penelope pressed a small package into Roy's hands. Open it when you're on the trail, she instructed, her voice steady despite the tears shining in her eyes. And remember what's waiting for you here. Roy cupped her face gently, memorizing every feature. I love you, he said simply, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, she replied. Now go, do what you must, and then come home to me. Their kiss held both promise and farewell, sweet and lingering until Marshall's impatient call from down the street forced them to part. I'll write when I can, Roy said, backing away reluctantly. Penelope nodded, standing straight and proud on the clinic steps. Be careful, always. With a final look at the woman who had changed his life, Roy turned and strode toward the waiting detective, his resolve strengthening with each step. The sooner this business with Delaney was concluded, the sooner he could return to the life and love he had found in Montrose. The pursuit of Ellie Delaney led Roy and Marshall on a winding trail through Colorado, New Mexico, and finally into the harsh desert landscape of Arizona Territory. Roy's knowledge of the gang's old hiding places and contacts proved invaluable, allowing them to gradually close in on the remaining members of the once formidable outlaw band. Throughout the journey, Roy held fast to his connection with Penelope through letters sent whenever they passed through settlements with postal service. Her replies, delivered to various sheriff's offices along their route, became his lifeline, her steady, practical voice on paper reminding him of the future waiting once his task was complete. In quiet moments by the campfire, he often opened the package she had given him at their parting. Inside was a simple gold band, a man's wedding ring, and a small daguerreotype of Penelope, her serious expression softened by the hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. On the back of the image, she had written, "For remembering, come back to me." These tokens he kept close, the ring on a leather cord around his neck, the image tucked securely in an inner pocket of his coat, near his heart. Marshall proved to be a capable partner, hard and uncompromising in his pursuit of justice, but fair in his dealings with Roy. As the weeks stretched into months and winter gripped the territories, the detective seemed to develop a grudging respect for the former outlaw. "You're not what I expected, Kincaid," he remarked one evening as they huddled near their small fire, the wind howling across the Arizona plateau. "Most men who ride with the likes of Delaney don't just walk away and start over." Roy shrugged, pouring coffee into their battered tin cups. "I'm not most men." "No, you're not." Marshall studied him over the rim of his cup. "That doctor of yours must be something special." A smile touched Roy's lips. "She is." "Well, if all goes according to plan, you'll be heading back to her before the month is out. My informant says Delaney and his last 3 men are holed up at an abandoned ranch near the Gila River. We should reach it in 2, maybe 3 days. Roy nodded, his expression turning grim. The end of their hunt was near, but he knew from experience that Ellie Delaney would not be taken easily. The most dangerous part of their mission still lay ahead. 2 days later, as they approached the dilapidated ranch house under cover of darkness, Roy's premonition proved accurate. The ambush came suddenly, gunfire erupting from the surrounding brush as they dismounted to scout the property. Roy threw himself behind a large rock, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. Beside him, Marshall cursed as a bullet grazed his arm but maintained enough presence of mind to return fire. "How many?" the detective shouted over the din. Roy scanned the darkness, identifying muzzle flashes. "4, maybe 5, more than we expected." For long minutes, they exchanged fire with their hidden attackers, neither side gaining advantage. Then Roy spotted movement at the corner of the ranch house, a familiar silhouette illuminated briefly by gunfire. "Delaney," he breathed, recognizing the man who had been both mentor and tormentor for 8 years of his life. 10 o'clock by the corner of the house. Marshall nodded grimly. "Cover me. I'm going to work my way around to the left, try to flank them." "It's too risky," Roy objected. "We're outnumbered. Got a better idea." When Roy didn't respond, Marshall checked his ammunition. "Didn't think so, just keep them busy for a few minutes." Before Roy could argue further, the detective slipped away into the darkness. Grimly, Roy increased his rate of fire, hoping to draw the outlaw's attention away from Marshall's movement. The strategy seemed to be working until a shout of pain from the direction Marshall had taken announced that something had gone wrong. The gunfire from the ranch intensified, focusing on Roy's position as voices called orders to each other in the darkness. Roy knew he had moments at most before they rushed his position. With no time for careful planning, he made a desperate decision. Reaching into his pocket, he touched the daguerreotype of Penelope for luck, then burst from cover, firing as he ran toward the ranch house. The sudden offensive caught the outlaws by surprise. Roy managed to drop one man before pain exploded in his side, the impact of a bullet spinning him halfway around. Gritting his teeth against the agony, he kept moving, firing methodically as he closed the distance to the house. Another outlaw fell, and then Roy was at the corner of the building, pressing his back against the rough adobe as he tried to stem the bleeding from his side. He could hear Delaney shouting orders from somewhere nearby, the gang leader's voice as coldly calculating as Roy remembered. "Kincaid." "I know you're out there," Delaney called. "Should have known you'd be too stubborn to die easily." "It's over, Illy," Roy shouted back. "The Pinkertons have been picking off your men for months. There's nowhere left to run." Delaney's laugh held no humor. "Always was a bad liar, Roy. If the Pinkertons were really here in force, they wouldn't have sent just you and that detective I put a bullet in." Roy's heart sank at the confirmation of Marshall's fate, but he kept his voice steady. "Then it's just you and me like it should be. Face me, Illy. End this once and for all." For a moment, silence fell across the ranch yard. Then Delaney's voice came again, closer now. "You know, I always liked you, Roy, even after you betrayed me. That's why I'm going to kill you quick. Not like that pretty doctor of yours back in Montrose. For her, I've got something special planned." Cold fear gripped Roy's heart. "You stay away from her, Illy. This is between you and me." "Should have thought of that before you turned on me." Delaney's voice was casual, almost conversational, "but don't worry. I'll be sure to tell her you died bravely before I burn that clinic of hers to the ground." Rage and terror propelled Roy into action. Ignoring the wound in his side, he whirled around the corner of the building, firing at the shadowy figure he glimpsed there. Delaney returned fire, his first shot going wide, his second catching Roy high in the shoulder. Despite the fresh wave of pain, Roy kept moving forward, emptying his revolver at his former leader. Delaney staggered as at least one bullet found its mark, but remained upright, raising his gun for another shot. The click of an empty chamber was the sweetest sound Roy had ever heard. Before Delaney could reach for his second gun, Roy closed the distance between them, tackling the outlaw leader to the ground. They grappled in the dust, each fighting with the desperation of men who knew death awaited the loser. Despite his wounds, Roy fought with a strength born of love and the fierce determination to return to Penelope. When his hands closed around Delaney's throat, the outlaw leader's eyes widened in surprise at the implacable resolve he saw in Roy's face. "This is for everyone you've hurt," Roy ground out, tightening his grip. "For all the lives you've destroyed." Delaney's struggles weakened, then ceased altogether. Even after the outlaw lay still beneath him, Roy maintained his grip for long seconds, ensuring that the threat to Penelope to their future was truly eliminated. Only when he was certain did he release Delaney's throat, rolling away to lie gasping in the dirt beside his former leader's body. The pain from his wounds, momentarily forgotten in the heat of battle, returned with savage intensity, and Roy knew he was in serious trouble. Blood soaked his clothing, and his vision swam alarmingly. With tremendous effort, he dragged himself to where Marshall lay some yards away. The detective was alive but badly wounded, a bullet having taken him high in the chest. "Delaney," Marshall managed to ask, his voice barely audible. "Dead," Roy confirmed, slumping beside him. "The others too, I think," Marshall nodded weakly. "Good work, Kincaid, didn't think you had it in you." "Had something to fight for," Roy replied, his thoughts turning to Penelope. With fingers slick with his own blood, he withdrew the daguerreotype from his pocket, focusing on her image as darkness began to encroach on his vision. "Hold on," Marshall urged, seeing Roy's condition deteriorating. "Help will come." But Roy knew the nearest settlement was at least a day's ride away. Without medical attention, neither of them would survive their wounds. The bitter irony of dying now, with Delaney defeated and his future with Penelope so close, threatened to overwhelm him. As consciousness began to slip away, Roy clutched the image of Penelope to his chest, the gold band around his neck a tangible reminder of promises not yet fulfilled. "I'm sorry," he whispered to her likeness. "I tried to come back to you." Then darkness claimed him, and he knew no more. Awareness returned gradually, first the sensation of lying on something softer than the hard ground where he had fallen, then the smell of antiseptic and clean linen, so different from the dust and gunpowder of the ranch yard. Pain came next, dull and distant, as though wrapped in layers of cotton. Roy opened his eyes to a plain white ceiling, sunlight filtering through curtained windows, creating patterns of light and shadow. Confusion reigned for long moments, until a familiar voice, one he had feared he might never hear again, broke through his disorientation. "Welcome back," Penelope said softly, her face coming into view as she leaned over him. "You had us worried." Roy blinked, certain he must be dreaming or dead. "Penelope," his voice was a rasp, his throat parched. "Yes, it's me." Her smile was tired but radiant, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Lie still, you've been badly hurt." As his mind cleared, Roy took in his surroundings, the small room in what appeared to be a military infirmary, the evidence of recent care in the fresh bandages visible beneath his blanket, and most wonderfully, improbably, Penelope herself, looking weary but unharmed. "How?" he managed. "Where am I?" "Fort Yuma," she replied, helping him take small sips of water. "The army patrol that found you and Mr. Marshall brought you here. That was 10 days ago." 10 days. Roy struggled to comprehend the gap in his memory. "You came all this way." Penelope's hand found his, her touch achingly familiar. "When I received the telegram about your condition, nothing could have kept me away." "Marshall?" Roy asked, remembering the detective's wounds, "recovering like you. Though neither of you would be alive if that patrol hadn't come across you when they did." Her voice faltered slightly. "You lost a great deal of blood, Roy. The doctor here didn't think you'd survive the first night." Roy squeezed her hand weakly. "Should have known better than to bet against me when I had you to come back to." Tears spilled over onto Penelope's cheeks then, the first he had ever seen her shed. "When I saw you lying here, so still and pale, I thought I'd lost you." With effort, Roy raised his hand to brush away her tears. "Never. I promised I'd come back to you, didn't I?" She caught his hand and pressed it to her cheek. "Yes, you did, and now you have, though not quite in the way either of us planned." Despite his weakened state, Roy felt a surge of fierce joy at being reunited with her. "Delaney's dead," he told her. "It's over, all of it." "I know. Mr. Marshall told me everything when he was conscious enough to speak." Penelope's expression grew solemn. He also told me what Delaney said about me about Montrose. That's how I knew it was truly finished." Roy nodded, relieved she understood the significance of what had been accomplished. "The immunity Marshal promised has been arranged," she finished for him. "There were witnesses to your role in bringing down Delaney. The territorial governor has granted you a full pardon for any past crimes in recognition of your service." It seemed too much to comprehend all at once: his survival, Penelope's presence, the freedom from his past that he had hardly dared hope for. Overwhelmed, Roy closed his eyes briefly, feeling the sting of tears beneath his lids. "Marry me," he said when he opened them again, his gaze finding hers. "As soon as I can stand. I don't want to wait any longer." Penelope laughed through her tears, the sound like music to his ears. "I believe I already accepted your proposal, Mr. Kincaid. But yes, I'll marry you, though perhaps we should wait until you can walk down the aisle without assistance." "Just as long as it's soon," Roy insisted, tugging her closer despite the pain the movement caused. "I've waited long enough to make you my wife." Their kiss was gentle, mindful of his injuries, yet filled with the promise of a future neither had been certain they would share. When they parted, Penelope rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed as though in prayer or thanksgiving. "I washed the blood from your back once," she whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep you whole and well from now on, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me," Roy vowed. "Past, present, and future, it's all yours, Penelope Davis. Every day I have left is yours." Spring came to Montrose in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. The town square, festooned with ribbons and garlands, buzzed with excitement as residents gathered for the most anticipated wedding in recent memory. Inside the small church, Roy Kincaid stood at the altar, barely recognizable as the wounded outlaw who had stumbled into town nearly a year before. Clad in a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, he projected an air of quiet confidence tempered by the humility of a man who had been given a second chance at life. Beside him stood Marshall, recovered from his own wounds and present as both witness to the wedding and tangible proof of Roy's redemption. The detective had become an unexpected ally, his testimony instrumental in securing Roy's pardon and his friendship a bridge to Roy's new life as a respectable citizen. When the church doors opened and Penelope appeared, Roy felt his heart stop for an instant before resuming at a gallop. She was radiant in a gown of ivory silk, her normally practical hairstyle softened into loose curls framing her face. But it was her smile, confident, joyful, and directed solely at him, that took his breath away. As she moved down the aisle toward him, Roy reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first night when she had washed the blood from his back and offered acceptance without judgment, to the long separation while he pursued Delaney, to the weeks of recovery at Fort Yuma where their bond had deepened through shared hardship, each step had led inevitably to this day, this promise, this future they would build together. When Penelope reached his side and placed her hand in his, Roy felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the doubts and fears of his past. The words of the ceremony washed over him, significant not for their tradition, but for the commitment they represented. "I, Roy, take you, Penelope, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady and clear. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Penelope's response was equally firm, her green eyes never leaving his as she made the same solemn promise. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both a seal on their vows and a beginning, the first of countless such moments that would mark their life together. The celebration that followed spread from the church to the town square, the entire community joining in the festivities. Even Sheriff Thompson, unbent enough to offer his congratulations, albeit with a final warning to Roy to keep walking the straight and narrow. As dusk fell and the party continued around them, Roy drew Penelope away from the crowds to the quiet of her garden, their garden now. "Happy, Mrs. Kincaid?" he asked, his arm around her waist as they contemplated the home they would share. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I believe many of my patients will continue to call me Dr. Davis," Roy chuckled. "As they should. Your work is as much a part of you as mine is becoming a part of me." In the months since their return from Arizona, Roy had established himself as a valued member of the community. His experience with horses and travel had led to a partnership in the livery stable, while his protective instincts found outlet in occasional work as a deputy when Sheriff Thompson needed assistance. He had even begun to assist Penelope more formally at the clinic, discovering an aptitude for medicine that surprised them both. "I never imagined this life," he mused, gazing at the small but thriving town that had become his home. "Never thought I deserved it." Penelope turned in his arms, her expression serious despite the joy of the day. "Happiness isn't about deserving, Roy. It's about recognizing it when it's offered and having the courage to embrace it. Like you did when a bleeding outlaw collapsed in your clinic," he teased gently. "Exactly like that." She reached up to trace the line of his jaw, her touch still capable of sending warmth coursing through him after all they had shared. "I knew even then that there was more to you than your worst mistakes. You saw a better man than I knew how to be," Roy acknowledged. "And somehow, loving you has helped me become him." Penelope smiled, the last light of sunset gilding her features. "That's the thing about love. It doesn't just accept us as we are, it helps us become what we're meant to be." As darkness fell over Montrose and the sounds of celebration continued in the distance, Roy Kincaid held his wife close, marveling at the journey that had brought him from outlaw to respected citizen, from solitary fugitive to beloved husband. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, healing, building, loving. And when, in years to come, their children asked how they had met, the story would always begin the same way. "She washed the blood from his back," the cowboy said. "You don't know what I've done," and she said, "I don't need to." In the end, it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.